I could have smiled. I could have played along. But I chose not to. I've spent most of my adult life holding my breath. Not in fear and restraint. The kind that tightens your ribs during conversations, that makes you rehearse every reply so no one feels embarrassed. The kind of breath you hold when you walk into a room, hoping just to be good enough, pleasant enough, small enough not to disrupt anyone's comfort. But on that evening, under the polished chandeliers, surrounded by glasses of dry wine and safer versions of ourselves, I exhaled. And everything changed. The event wasn't special. A winter fundraiser for a children's literacy charity. Polished, quiet, tasteful. The kind of gathering where everyone wore kindness like perfume, noticeable but not necessarily sincere. I arrived just behind my husband, Mark, a few strands of hair clinging to my lipstick as the wind outside had pulled it from its clip. He didn't notice. He rarely did anymore. Mark had always been the charming one. The man who remembered names, who ordered for two without asking, who could turn an awkward silence into a polite chuckle with a single well-placed joke. I used to admire it. Then I began to envy it. And now I just brace for it because charm, when weaponized, is crueler than silence. We were 3 minutes into mingling when she appeared. Lena, his ex. Tall, impossibly poised. One of those women who never seemed to wrinkle, never seemed to stumble. She floated toward us with the ease of someone who has never had to prove her worth twice. Mark's arm stiffened slightly beside mine. Then he smiled, the real one, the one I hadn't seen in years. Lena, he said, like her name tasted better than my cooking. She lit up. Mark. Wow. They embraced. I stood just slightly behind him, like luggage. Forgotten until needed. Then he said it. This is Elise, gesturing toward me with the same tone you'd use to introduce a colleague or a neighbor who once helped you carry groceries. My wife. My chest tightened. Not because of the word, but because of how little it meant when he said it. Lena nodded, offering a faint smile. It's lovely to meet you. Before I could respond, Mark added with a short laugh, she's the serious one. I turned to look at him, expecting something else. A wink. A joke's end. A rescue. But he continued. She's all order and structure. Lists for everything. Even vacations have schedules. He chuckled again, this time looking at Lena like they were sharing a private joke I wasn't invited to. Lena tilted her head, amused. Sounds efficient. She even pre-packs meds and snacks for plane rides, he said, grinning. In case of emergencies. Then he looked at me for the first time in minutes. You know, just in case something ruins the fun. They laughed. I didn't. I smiled. That kind of small, polite smile that you train into place like a muscle spasm. Inside, I felt something tear just a little. They kept talking about old college events, mutual friends, a band they both used to love. I faded into the background. Mark didn't notice when I stepped aside to get another drink. I stood near the corner of the room, watching the lights play off the glass walls, pretending to scroll my phone. But my ears stayed trained on his voice. She used to hate when I stayed out late, he told Lena with a smirk. Now she's asleep before 10. Married life. She sounds very responsible, Lena offered gently. Mark shrugged. Depends on your definition of fun. But hey, someone has to keep the electricity on, right? I froze. That sentence. Not cruel. Not loud. But devastating. It wasn't what he said, it was how. The dismissiveness. The way he turned me into a metaphor for drudgery. The way he used me to make himself more appealing. Safer. Looser. More desirable. I wasn't a person to him in that moment. I was a narrative prop. The dull wife, the joyless home, the safe harbor he'd outgrown. By the time I returned to his side, his hand brushed mine like he was confirming I was still there, not inviting me back. I told him I had a headache. He nodded, barely listening. You're always tired lately. There it was again. That quiet dig. Always. A word meant to pin you to a pattern and use it as proof. I looked at Lena. She offered a look that was half sympathy, half superiority. Not cruel, but enough. I think I'll head out early, I said. Mark glanced at his watch. It's only 9. I know. He didn't follow me to the coat check. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't notice the trembling in my hands as I buttoned my coat. He was already turned back toward her. The air outside was colder than I remembered. I walked slowly to the car, my heels clicking on the stone, echoing louder than I expected. Each step felt like a word I hadn't said aloud. I could have told him how he made me feel invisible. I could have reminded him of the years I'd carried us when his business failed, when his mother fell ill, when he needed quiet more than affection. I could have screamed, but I didn't. Instead, I sat behind the wheel, letting the warmth of the engine wrap around me like a blanket I didn't deserve. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my contacts, scrolled past the predictable names coworkers, in-laws, grocery delivery, until I landed on one I thought I'd deleted long ago. David. There was no hesitation in my fingers. The phone rang twice. Elise. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Calm. Solid. I know it's late, I whispered. A pause. Where are you? He asked. That night, I didn't go home. I drove across the city, windshield wipers brushing away the soft mist of rain. The streetlights blurred like candlelight in a dream. David opened the door before I even knocked. He hadn't changed much. Still wore those soft sweaters. Still looked at me like I was a person, not a burden. He didn't ask questions. He didn't touch me. I slept in the guest room. Alone. But not lonely. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next careless word. The next joke made at my expense. The next apology that never came. In the silence of that unfamiliar bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every word Mark had spoken that night. She's the serious one. Lists for everything. She's always tired. Someone has to keep the electricity on. They weren't insults. That was the genius of it. They were truths, bent just enough to draw blood. And the worst part? He believed he was being funny. Affectionate, even. The same way you pat a dog for barking when told, "Good girl. Stay." But I wasn't laughing anymore. I wasn't staying anymore. The resentment bloomed in my chest like something living. Not loud, not wild, but steady. I wasn't plotting anything yet. I didn't need to, because something had already begun to shift. And in that quiet room, under someone else's roof, I realized something I hadn't dared admit. I didn't want him to love me anymore. I wanted him to regret not knowing how. Morning came gently through pale curtains. I hadn't really slept. Not for lack of comfort. David had always kept his guest room immaculate, the sheets crisp, the blanket soft and clean-smelling. No, it was something else. A quiet hum beneath the stillness, like standing next to an appliance you thought was off but still vibrated in your bones. I lay there a long time, watching the way the light shifted across the ceiling. At home, Mark would be rising now, tying the same striped tie he wore to every Monday meeting, toasting the bread I always bought, using the espresso machine I saved up for, carefully following the instructions I wrote out and taped beside it. He wouldn't notice my absence until halfway through his second cup. And, even then, it would take the form of inconvenience, not concern. That thought settled on my chest like a stone. This wasn't about last night anymore. Not just the careless jokes, or the look he gave Lena. It was about everything that led to that moment, the slow erosion of recognition, the years of being spoken over, spoken around, but rarely spoken to. I sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders, and reached for my phone. One text. From Mark. Are you okay? 3 words. No punctuation. No question mark. As if he wasn't even sure how to frame the sentence. As if the message itself was an obligation, not an impulse. I didn't answer. I set the phone back down and let the silence speak louder. Memory is strange. It doesn't hit all at once. It drips. Slowly, painfully, until your skin is soaked and you can't tell when it started raining. I remembered the dinner we hosted last spring when his colleagues came over and I spent 3 days preparing the meal. I had hand-washed every glass, ironed the napkins, and even printed little place cards. When someone complimented the chicken, Mark smiled and said, "She gets obsessive about things like this. Perfectionism runs in her family." I remember the smile freezing on my face. The same way the compliments died in the room. He didn't mean it cruelly. That was his favorite defense. It was just a joke, Elise. But it never felt like a joke. It felt like being reduced. Like having your care turned into a flaw, your effort into a spectacle. Every time I tried to create something meaningful, he held it up like an exhibit and always added a caption. I remembered the vacation we took to Vermont. I'd found the cabin, booked it a year in advance, made itineraries with optional routes for hiking, museums, even coffee shops. I had printed a small folder for each day with maps in case cell service failed. He flipped through it once and said, "You'd make a great tour guide," and laughed. That laugh. Always low, always polite. Just enough to make it seem like he was amused, never cruel, just mildly entertained. That's what I was to him. A well-organized assistant with access to his schedule. Not a partner. Not someone he was proud to stand beside. And I had accepted that for years. The resentment bloomed slowly, like a bruise under pale skin. Each memory came with a weight. A sentence I had stored away. A moment I had brushed off. Not because I was blind, but because I had taught myself to look away. To minimize my own hurt for the sake of peace. I remembered birthdays. The year I turned 35, he gave me a robe. A soft, white robe, still in the plastic packaging. No note. No wrapping paper. When I asked if he picked it out himself, he said, "You're always cold." Figured it made sense. Not because I love how you curl up on the couch. Not because you deserve something soft. Just a utility. A solution to a minor inconvenience. For his birthday, I once tracked down a rare bottle of scotch he mentioned in passing 2 years earlier. I wrote a card. I cooked. I lit candles. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You always go overboard." That was the pattern, wasn't it? My effort, excessive. His bare minimum, acceptable. My thoughtfulness, dramatic. His silence, mature. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a life where my fullness was too much. Where my care was met with commentary, not gratitude. Even my appearance became a quiet battlefield. When I asked if he noticed my new haircut, he had glanced up once, said, "Looks neat," and returned to his emails. When I gained weight during a difficult year, he offered advice about tracking apps and meal planning. Not once did he ask how I felt. Not once did he offer comfort. He always framed it as concern. Always wrapped criticism in the language of logic. That way, if I got upset, he could sigh and say, "Why are you being so sensitive?" That line still burns. At breakfast, David made coffee without asking how I liked it because he remembered. Almond milk. 1 sugar. No fuss. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press me for details. He just sat across from me in his quiet kitchen, sipping his own coffee and letting the silence be shared instead of avoided. There was something healing in that. Not romantic. Not magical. Just safe. It made me realize how long I had gone without that safety. Not from harm, but from dismissal. Mark never raised his voice. He never called me names. He never insulted me outright. But he dimmed me day after day. One comment, one shrug, one sigh at a time. And I let him. Because I believed love was compromise. Because I thought being easygoing meant swallowing discomfort without complaint. Because I confused patience with endurance. But what I endured wasn't love. It was slow erasure. Back home, I used to sit at the kitchen table after he went to bed. A cup of tea in my hands, staring out the window at the dark street, wondering if I was imagining it all. The emptiness. The quiet withdrawal. The subtle cold. I told myself I was lucky. He didn't cheat. He didn't yell. He didn't leave. But he also didn't stay. Not really. He existed beside me, not with me. Like roommates who occasionally touched hands by accident. As I sat in David's guest room again, still not ready to return home, I thought about that gala. Not the moment Lena appeared, but the moment Mark decided to perform. That's what it was. A performance. A subtle rewriting of our story. One where he played the exhausted husband with the intense wife. The man who once had fun and now lived under a schedule. And the worst part? No one stopped him. No one questioned it. Because it's easier to laugh along than to look closer. And I had played along for too long. His text sat unread for another hour. I imagined him sitting on the couch. Maybe watching something light. Maybe waiting for me to return like nothing happened. I imagined the version of him who would say, "You're overreacting. It wasn't personal. You know how I get when I'm nervous." That's how he would explain it away. With reason. With restraint. And I would be left with the full weight of what he didn't say. The apology he would never offer. The hurt he would never acknowledge. I got up. Took a shower. Wrote nothing to him. Said nothing to anyone. But inside, something had cracked. And what was flowing through it was not rage. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. I was tired. Not from marriage. But from disappearing inside it. From being reduced to someone's balance sheet. The efficient one. The logical one. The responsible one. I didn't want to be his assistant anymore. Or his excuse. Or his mirror. I don't know what comes next. I'm not even sure what I want from David. Maybe nothing. But I do know this. I will not return to that house with the same silence I left it with. And when I do return, if I do, I won't be holding my breath. Snow had begun to fall by the time I returned home. The world outside had softened under the first real storm of winter. Sidewalks blurred into streets, rooftops dulled beneath the silence of white. There's something sacred about snowfall. It doesn't ask permission to bury things. It simply covers, gently and completely, without apology. I stepped into the foyer with a careful breath. The house was warm, clean, predictable. Everything exactly where I left it. My coat slid from my shoulders and landed on the bench. My shoes thudded softly to the rug. Even the act of returning felt rehearsed, as if I had never left, as if nothing had cracked open the night before. But inside, I was already somewhere else. Mark's voice came from the kitchen. "Hey," he called casually. "You're home. Not you're back. Not I missed you. Just you're home." A neutral observation. A status update. I walked in. He was leaning against the counter, stirring a pot of sauce with practiced ease. Something tomato-based. He always made pasta on Mondays. He glanced up. "You okay?" It was the second time he had asked in 2 days. Still no punctuation. Still no meaning behind it. "I'm fine," I said, setting my bag on the table. Another lie. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't ask if I was angry or hurt or if he had done something wrong. Because in his mind, none of it had crossed a line. He had laughed. I had left. That was it. Maybe he thought I was sensitive. Maybe he chalked it up to exhaustion. Maybe he believed I'd get over it like I always did. He handed me a plate. "Pasta's ready. Want some?" "I ate already," I replied. Another lie. My stomach was empty, but my resentment was full. He nodded, unaffected. "There's more if you change your mind." That was it. No apology. No reflection. Just red sauce and small talk. I stood there, plate untouched, watching him eat like it was any other Monday. And it hit me how little my absence had registered. Later that evening, he sat on the couch watching one of his procedural dramas. I stood by the dining table, slowly flipping through our shared calendar, our finances, our linked accounts. For years, I had been the keeper of everything that made our lives functional: bills, reminders, appointments, gifts. My role had evolved beyond partnership into quiet administration. I had stopped feeling like a wife and started functioning more like a personal assistant who occasionally shared a bed with her employer. I stared at the spreadsheet titled 2024 Budget Overview. My name was listed next to nearly every auto payment. Electricity, water, internet, subscriptions, his gym, his audiobooks, the software for his work-from-home setup. I had created the system. He just lived in it. That's when I clicked the first toggle. Cancel auto payment. Electricity bill. The one in my name, but mostly used by his devices, his office, his hours. Then the second. His music subscription. Cancelled. Then his gym. He hadn't been in months. Then the annual renewal for his favorite design app, the one he always said helped him feel creative, though he hadn't opened it since spring. It wasn't sabotage. It was removal. Upstairs, the bedroom felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe I was just noticing it now. I undressed slowly, slipping into the soft gray sleepwear he'd once said made me look too old for my age. I had stopped wearing it for a while. Chose silk instead, tried lace, then eventually gave up and wore whatever was closest to the drawer edge. Tonight, I wore the gray. Not out of defiance, but because it was comfortable. And because his opinion no longer felt like a compass. He was already asleep when I slipped into bed, breathing steady, unworried. He hadn't noticed the shift in the air, the retraction of warmth beside him. He would, eventually. But not yet. The next morning, I didn't make coffee. He always waited for me to start the machine, to prep the filter, to leave it steaming on the corner for him with a splash of oat milk. This time, I didn't. He came into the kitchen, blinking. No coffee. I looked up from my phone. No time. That was it. No excuse. No apology. He blinked again and quietly filled the kettle. A small inconvenience. Barely noticeable. But I watched him feel it. That afternoon, I sat in my car during my lunch break. Not to eat. Just to breathe. I scrolled through a note on my phone. A list titled, Things I Used to Enjoy. It had started out as therapy homework years ago. I had forgotten it was still there. Line after line. Painting, even badly. Reading fiction with no educational value. Going to the cinema alone. Spontaneous walks. Singing while cleaning. Not explaining myself. The last one. That one stayed with me. I had forgotten what it felt like to exist without the need to justify every mood, every silence, every reaction. With Mark, even quiet became something I had to explain. He used to say, "You're hard to read." What he meant was, "You're not reacting the way I want you to." When I cried quietly, he'd shrug and say, "I can't fix what you won't tell me." When I told him how I felt, he'd say, "You're overanalyzing again." When I stopped talking altogether, he called me distant. It was a loop I could never win silent. I was cold. Vocal? I was dramatic. Calm? I was uncaring. So I stopped trying to be anything for him at all. The small rebellions continued. I deleted the reminder to buy him a new winter coat. He had dropped hints for weeks, leaving ads open, mentioning it offhand. I had always caught those breadcrumbs. Not this time. I removed his parents' anniversary from the shared calendar. Let him remember on his own. I paused the credit card that linked to his online subscriptions. The one under my name. He noticed. "Did the Netflix log out?" he asked that evening. "I don't know," I said, folding laundry. "Maybe the card expired." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. He didn't know I had cut the cord myself. Snow fell again that Friday. Thicker this time. The kind that makes the world feel muffled. Like everything is being held gently and none of it deserves noise. I stood by the window with a cup of tea. The one he never remembered how I took. He always guessed wrong. Too much sugar. The wrong mug. The wrong timing. It wasn't about the tea. It was about attention. It was about noticing. He noticed what mattered to him. His hobbies. His screens. His tiredness. But never my silence. Never my small unraveling. He walked into the room behind me, yawned, and said, "We should plan something for New Year's." I nodded slowly. "Maybe." "You okay?" He asked again. That question, always repeated, always hollow. I turned to him and smiled. I'm fine. Lie number 5. He walked away. That night, I called David again. Not for comfort. Not for romance. Just for someone who knew my voice before it became so tired. We talked about nothing. About books. About movies. About a memory from college I had forgotten until he laughed. He didn't ask about Mark. He didn't pry. He didn't try to fix anything. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Not because I had a solution, but because I had a self again. One not defined by someone else's preferences. I sat on the floor by our bed later, watching Mark sleep again. Peaceful. Content. Still unaware that I had left him in every way but physically. Still unaware that the warmth he felt in the room came from a fire I no longer intended to tend. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was absence. Quiet, intentional, liberating. This was me reclaiming the space he never noticed he took. He started noticing the small things first. The calendar wasn't updated. His reminders for bills, appointments, family obligations, all gone. He asked me once, over breakfast, did you move the dentist appointment? I stirred my tea. I didn't book one this time. He blinked. You always handle that. I must have forgotten. I replied softly, not looking up. That was the first time I saw it, the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Not panic. Not pain. Just confusion. Like something in the machinery had stopped clicking, and he didn't know where the missing gear had gone. He assumed it was a phase. People do that. They explain away change they don't want to confront. They label it with words that feel manageable. You've been quiet lately, he said one night, folding a sweater badly and stuffing it into his drawer. I nodded. I've been thinking a lot. About what? I looked at him, straight in the eyes, and said, everything. He paused, the sweater halfway closed between the drawer and his fingers. Then he laughed. Let me know when you figure it out. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't cruel. But it told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't taking me seriously. He still thought I'd bounce back. That was his pattern. Wait me out. Let time smooth the edges of my discontent. Let routine wrap itself back around me like a coat I was too tired to shrug off. What he didn't realize was that I hadn't taken it off. I'd burned it. He tried harder after that. Not in the way that mattered. Not emotionally. But through gestures. He offered to make dinner. He brought home a new brand of tea. He vacuumed without being asked. For years, I would have softened at these efforts. I would have told myself, he's trying. I would have leaned in. This time, I simply watched. He was treating it like a transaction. Do nice things. Get normal Elise back. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't withholding anything from him. I was simply done giving. The holidays crept in quietly. We didn't decorate. I didn't pull the storage boxes from the attic. The wreath remained in its dusty bag. He asked, are we doing the tree this year? I shrugged. If you want one, go ahead. That was new. For 12 years, I had initiated every holiday ritual. I baked. I ordered gifts early. I wrapped them beautifully. I lit candles, played the soft music he liked. I made sure the house felt like a place worth coming home to. This time, I let the air remain still. He didn't get the tree. He didn't bake. He didn't know how. I received a message from his sister a few days later. Short, polite. Everything okay with you two? Mark seems off lately. I didn't reply. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I had already given too many explanations for a story no one ever really wanted to understand. Mark began getting irritable. Not loudly. Just little sighs. Longer pauses. Sharper questions. One night, he stood in the kitchen holding the mail. Did you forget to renew the car insurance? No, I said calmly. I didn't forget. He stared at me. So, you just didn't do it? I figured it wasn't my responsibility anymore. His mouth opened, then shut. I walked past him, picked up my tea, sat down in the living room. He didn't follow. Another night, I came home late from work. I had taken a walk after my shift, stood by the river, let the cold sting my cheeks just to remind myself I was still here. When I opened the door, he was pacing. "Where were you?" I blinked. "Out. It's 8:30. "Yes." He stared at me, waiting, needing me to explain, to unravel my motivations so he could decide how upset he was allowed to be. "I don't owe you a report," I said gently, taking off my scarf. His voice rose just slightly. "Is this about the gala? Are you still upset about that?" I paused. Then, for the first time, I let the silence expand between us. Long, dense, unapologetic. "Elise, come on. You've been punishing me for days." I turned slowly. "I'm not punishing you." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm observing." "Observing what?" "What happens when I stop being useful to you?" His face changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was panic. Because deep down, he understood what I meant. Not in words, but in function. He was watching his comfort erode, and he didn't know how to build it back without me. He tried again that weekend. Brought home flowers. The same kind he always did. White lilies. I hated lilies. I had told him that years ago. They made me think of hospitals, of waiting rooms. But he always brought them anyway. I placed them in the vase and didn't water them. They wilted in 2 days. He asked what happened. I said, maybe they weren't the right kind. He called my name more often now. "Elise, where's the charger? Elise, did you order groceries? Elise, do you remember if?" I stopped answering. Not with anger. With silence. And in that silence, I began to feel something new. Power. Not the kind that dominates. The kind that withdraws. The kind that teaches someone what they took for granted by removing the evidence of your labor. He finally asked the real question one evening, while we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the TV murmuring something neither of us cared about. "Do you still love me?" It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even emotional. It was cautious. Like a man opening a door he never thought would lock. I looked at him. And I thought about all the versions of love I had performed for him. All the dinners made when I was too tired to stand. All the lists, the calls, the reminders. The softened words. The apologies I made for his comfort. Then I said, "I'm not sure anymore." He flinched like I had thrown something. But I hadn't. I had only told the truth. The next morning, the kitchen was messy. He had left dishes in the sink. He used to say I was too particular about cleanliness. That a few crumbs didn't matter. Now the crumbs stayed where they fell. I left them. He waited for me to notice. I walked past. He asked, "Can we talk tonight?" I said, "I won't be home." "Where are you going?" "I have plans." He didn't ask with whom. He already knew not to. Later that night, he texted me. "I don't know how to fix this." I read it, set the phone down, and kept walking. Because he didn't need to fix it. He needed to fix himself. And I was no longer volunteering for that job. It wasn't a grand moment. Not an announcement. Not a door slammed. No dramatic exits. It was the quiet that told the truth. A morning just like any other. I woke before the sun. Slipped out of bed. My husband's back to me, his breathing slow and even. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take much. Just the things that belonged to me, not by purchase, but by presence. My journals. A few books. My coat. The necklace my mother gave me the year she said she was proud of me. Everything else? I left behind. Even the wedding ring. I set it gently on the kitchen counter next to the empty vase of dead lilies. The apartment I moved into was small, quiet, and clean. A temporary rental. Sparse. But the walls were mine, the key was mine, and the air felt lighter. I hadn't realized how heavy a space could be until I walked into one that didn't carry his voice in the corners. There was no chaos. No yelling. No accusations. Just stillness. I sat on the floor with a mug of tea, watching the snow fall through the window. A small plant from the landlord's welcome basket sat on the sill. A candle flickered in the corner. No one needed anything from me. No one asked me to explain. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. 3 days passed before Mark knocked on my door. He didn't call first. He just arrived. I watched him through the peephole. He looked tired. Thinner, somehow. Like life had been rearranged in his hands and he didn't recognize the pieces anymore. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Elise," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I nodded once. "We're talking." He shifted awkwardly. Held up a folder. I had some papers drawn up. Separation agreements. I thought, maybe we could handle it quickly. I took the folder. Flipped through the pages. "Efficient," I said. "You always did like things neat." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I wanted to explain," he said, eyes scanning my face. "About the gala. About the things I said." "You don't need to." He looked startled. "I don't." "No." A pause. Then softly I added, "You only explain when you believe the person deserves the truth. You never did believe that about me." He stood there, speechless. I waited. When the silence stretched too long, he tried again. "Was there someone else?" A question meant to redirect the pain. To turn my absence into a betrayal. Something to be angry about instead of ashamed. I didn't answer. Not because the question was beneath me, but because the question didn't matter. The story he would tell himself had already started writing itself. I wouldn't edit it. I wouldn't give him closure in the shape of blame. "I'm not angry," he said, finally. "I know," I replied. "You never were." That was the problem. He blinked, confused. "I spent years waiting for you to care enough to get angry. Or happy. Or anything. But you lived like comfort was a substitute for affection." "Elise, I'm not here to convince you of anything," I said calmly. "You asked for a conversation. This is it." He looked like he wanted to cry. But didn't. And that too, that inability to let anything rise to the surface, was the reason we were here in the first place. I handed him the folder. "I'll have it signed and sent back." Then I closed the door. Quietly. Not with rage. But with finality. It wasn't over, of course. People like Mark don't let go easily. Not because of love. But because of what they lose when they no longer have you to hold everything together. The messages started coming a few days later. "You're being cold. You didn't even give us a chance. This is so unlike you. We can fix this if you stop running." Each one like a tiny stone thrown at a door I no longer answered. I read them, then deleted them. No response. Not even anger. And then, something unexpected. A letter. Not from him. From a woman I barely remembered. Her name was Anna. She worked at the same hospital where I used to volunteer during college. We had crossed paths again at the fundraiser, the one where everything cracked open. Her handwriting was careful. Slanted. I read the note 3 times. "Dear Elise, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. At the gala, I watched something happen that you probably thought no one noticed. The way he spoke about you. The way he laughed at you. The way you smiled to protect the room from discomfort. I saw it. And I wanted you to know someone else did too. Years ago, you sat with my mother after her stroke. No one else wanted to stay late. But you did. You talked to her like she was still whole. I never forgot that. I don't know what you're going through. But if you ever doubt who you are, remember that moment. You matter. Just as you are. With deep respect. Anna." I folded the letter gently. Placed it on my new kitchen table. And I let the tears come. Not from pain. But from recognition. There is something sacred about being seen. Not as useful. Not as dependable. But as human. I hadn't realized how hungry I was for that until someone handed it back to me, unasked. Mark had never seen me. He had noticed what I did. What I fixed. What I managed. But not once, not truly, had he seen the woman behind it. And I was done asking for that. The final paperwork arrived 2 weeks later. I signed without ceremony. No letter. No note. Just initials. Just a signature. Clean. Quiet. Complete. Sometimes I still think about the night I called David. Not because of what we said, but because it was the first time I chose myself. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. David never asked what happened afterward. He never reached out again. And that, too, felt like grace. He had opened a door. I had walked through it. Nothing owed. Nothing forced. Just a moment of clarity, allowed to exist without demand. I don't know where Mark is now. Maybe in the same house, with the same furniture, the same routines, but a little colder. A little quieter. Maybe he's rewriting the story. Maybe I'm the one who gave up. The one who ran. Let him. I'm not here to defend my version. I'm here to live it. One evening, I lit a candle in my new apartment. The window opened just enough to let in the winter air. I wrapped myself in a blanket and opened the book I'd been meaning to read for 3 years. No one interrupted. No one commented. No one asked for anything. The stillness wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, I breathed.